Hello and welcome to this episode of India and the World on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. It is now the second month of the US-Iran war, and we're not really sure where this is headed. It's not showing any signs of de-escalation. On one hand, there are reports that President Trump may be considering putting boots on the ground in Iran. On the other hand, he keeps talking about having peace talks with the Iranians, which they have publicly denied. And therefore, we're kind of in a fix as to what exactly is happening. What would the consequences be for America, for the rest of the world, if there were boots on the ground? The world is already reeling from high oil prices. There is talk today of jet fuel shortages, of many economies being shaken by these developments in the Middle East. What, therefore, should we expect to happen over the next few days and weeks? Professor Jeffrey Sachs, world-renowned economist, joining us on DeKoder once again today. Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for being with us. I actually wanted to begin this interview today with a social media post, yet again, that President Trump put up in the last 24 hours, where he said the US is in a serious discussion with a new and more reasonable regime, as he puts it, to end our military operations in Iran. But he also says that if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, and if the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and possibly all desalinization plants as well. It's quite extraordinary that a US president is actually threatening war crimes against another country in the way that he has. What does this say about the state of his mind and where this war is going?
Well, first, regarding the state of his mind, he is the most mentally unstable president in American history. Clearly, there's a mental instability here, as well as the militarized policies. The clinical psychologists identify what's called the dark triad personality throughout Trump's entire life. Dark triad personality means a personality that is first narcissistic. Trump thinks only of himself. Second, that is what they call Machiavellian, which means highly manipulative and completely untrustworthy. For example, bombing your counterpart in the midst of negotiations. And third, psychopathic. These are the three characteristics of the dark triad personality. Trump is mentally unstable, in my view. But in addition to that, some psychologists say that he shows signs of frontotemporal dementia. We've been through this before. We had a demented president last time in the last year or two of the Biden administration. I'm not a clinical psychologist to confirm this, but I am repeating observations that are being made. In other words, the mental state is not normal. A president of the United States should not write a post threatening massive war crimes. What President Trump has been saying for months is delusional, that he will pick the next supreme leader, that he will obliterate the Iranian economy. Of course, his threats also come, they scare people, then they go, and then new threats are made. So there's a lot of contradictory wording, which is part of the instability mentally. But it also shows another sign that I think is important to understand. American politics is deinstitutionalized right now, meaning we are not seeing decision-making in a rational process. We're not seeing the deliberations, even within the so-called executive branch of the U.S., where the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies, and other relevant groups, the National Security Council, the White House, are considering options, debating them, considering implications, and then choosing on the basis of objectives. We're clearly seeing a highly personalized and broken process where there is no rational consideration of options, and where a very small group of people, including Trump and his Secretary of War, so-called, Hegseth, and a handful of other people, his son-in-law, and a few others, are making these decisions, which so far are sticking and are being followed through. And this is leading to war that is extraordinarily dangerous. Add to the fact that his colleague in this war, Benjamin Netanyahu, is also absolutely another mentally unstable individual, ruthless, Machiavellian, psychopathic in the same way, and also with his hands on power the same way. You have two leaders here who are extremely dangerous and have, I can't say single-handedly, I would say it's two of them together that have brought the world to its greatest economic peril in many, many decades. It's extraordinary. Rarely could you have two people causing this kind of global calamity that we're facing.
Absolutely, and we're feeling that pain, in so many parts of the world right now that are so far away geographically from where the theater of this war is playing out. Whether it is India, Indonesia, so many other countries that are having to ration fuel now, even impose work from home policies and so on. But what would be the implications, Professor Sachs, politically and otherwise, if the Americans were actually to go in for a ground invasion? Again, there are contradictory reports about this, and we've seen thousands of US Marines have moved into the Gulf in the last few days. Maybe Trump is keeping his options open, maybe it's a pressure tactic, or maybe he's actually planning something as crazy as a ground invasion. But what would be the consequences of that if that were to happen?
First of all, I think the likelihood is a ground invasion. The basic experience is that you do not move thousands and thousands of troops into a theater of war and then not deploy them and use them in an actual military operation. So I think the expectation is that this is not a bluff. Trump, each time when major troop movements have been deployed or aircraft and aircraft carrier groups deployed, for example, last summer in the so-called 12-day war in Iran, or a similar military buildup around Venezuela in the prelude to the U.S. operation in Venezuela, and now the same thing again in Iran. This is not a bluff. This is taking time to get these troops in place. And what is a bluff is the claim of negotiation, because that is basically covering the time for deployment. And so I think a ground operation is likely. I think it's likely to be a disaster for the world. Whatever specifically happens militarily in the occasion, the continued accelerated destruction of the Gulf region, I think, is very likely. The destruction of parts of Israel, very likely. The accelerated bombing and destruction in Iran, quite likely. The spread of war to the Red Sea with the Houthis more actively engaged, very likely. War has that tendency. Things don't go according to plans, especially when the planners are the kind of delusional amateurs that are actually calling the shots right now in the United States and Israel. These are not serious war planners to begin with. So I think we're likely to see an escalation of the war, and I think the consequences are likely to be very dire. And I think that the only way to prevent it is from a few world leaders that have the stature to prevent it, to intervene urgently right now. And I've been calling.
I do want to ask you about possibly a role that whether India could or could not play. But before I get to that,
Yes,
Professor Sachs, because you're talking about what you see as a further escalation of this war, the dire consequences, as you put it, for the world. I just wanted to understand from you, from an economic point of view, the kind of pain that the world could feel from this. We're already seeing that fuel prices. I see that even in America, it's now $4 a gallon, which is the first time it's hit that mark, I think, since 2022. So I think even for ordinary Americans, it's going to start hitting home. But what about the rest of us, world economies that were kind of recovering, from COVID and that disaster a few years ago, to now be plunged into this crisis? What
yes.
a
If
what,
if 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 it turns out that events go the way that I'm describing, certainly not sure, but if it does, we'll look back with the fond memories of oil at only $115 a barrel, because oil prices will jump to $150 a barrel, maybe $200 a barrel. Shortages physically will be absolutely severe. There will be a food crisis later in the year because fertilizer simply won't exist in quantities. It's not just the price, it is the supply side. So crops will be planted without fertilizer in many places that need the nitrogen in the soil, thank you, and crops will fail. I'm worried. I'm keeping one eye on the weather reports or the climate reports, because there's also growing, again, uncertainty, but a growing possibility of a major El Nino occurrence towards the end of this year. That's when the Pacific Ocean warms. And when that happens, you get a lot of physical instability of agriculture. You get droughts and floods and other calamities spreading. And if this is combined with the fertilizer crisis, it's going to be really something that we haven't seen for a very long time, probably exceeding the huge disruptions to the world that took place in the 1970s with the two oil shocks of that period. So my view is that we're heading towards a very deep crisis. India will suffer a lot. All countries will. Even the United States, which is roughly balanced in energy exports and imports, is linked to the world markets. So the prices of energy are soaring in the United States. Texas prices of crude oil match the prices in Europe, which match the prices in Asia. This is one integrated market, and that means that the inflationary effects, the profit squeezes, the loss of jobs, this will affect all parts of the world, including the United States. But it's, of course, as always, the poorer places that are hit the most.
Absolutely. Coming back to your point, though, on mediation. Now we are seeing that Pakistan has, in a sense, become very much front and center of possible mediation efforts. I see also, as we speak, that there is a statement that the Pakistani and the Chinese have put out together. They had a meeting today, calling for a ceasefire and so on. Do you think do you think they are best placed for this mediation, given their relationship with Trump and Iran at the moment? Do you think India could step up and play a bigger role, or should it?
I thought from the start that the BRICS countries were the right countries to tell Mr. Trump, Stop it before you wreck the world. And stop your acolyte, Mr. Netanyahu, or your puppeteer, whatever it is, whatever the relationship is. Tell Israel that it must stop. Why the BRICS? Because the BRICS is the grouping that is half the world's output and half the world's population, and has three superpowers: India, China, and Russia. So these are three countries and three leaders, Prime Minister Modi, President Xi, and President Putin, that have the stature to say to Trump, stop. Stop before you wreck the world. Stop now. And that's why I thought the BRICS is the right group. Frankly, Pakistan intervening in this makes no sense. And Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt, well, this is not India, Russia, and China. This is a very different scale, and not one that is able to carry the day. I thought because India has the presidency of the BRICS, it has a special role to play. And of course, Prime Minister Modi is absolutely able to speak with Donald Trump at any moment and to put facts plainly, and put the facts plainly on behalf of the whole group. So it's not only an India call.
Why do you think that's not happened, given Mr. Modi's unique position?
I think it has been a mistake, frankly, because it should have happened. I would not have waited and let Pakistan make this claim, frankly. To my mind, it makes no sense, and it should have happened earlier. I think that, personally, I don't like India's relationship with Israel. I think it's unbecoming for India to be in this relationship with this country, which is so destabilizing, so aggressive, so militaristic, involved in so many wars in the Middle East. But Prime Minister Modi was in India just days before, in Israel, excuse me, just days before the war started. It's a mistake, in my opinion. India is a great power. It's one of the key stabilizing countries of the whole world. It should not be playing Israel's game. Israel is a deeply destabilizing country. I'm very sorry to say. But Israel has this ideology that it will never allow a state of Palestine, and so it will overthrow any government that supports the Palestinian cause. That's the political root of Israel's behavior in this. That's why Netanyahu said, this is a dream come true of 40 years. He's been dreaming of this war. This isn't a war because something happened in the last year or 6 months. This is Netanyahu's dream for 40 years. It is, I can tell you. I thought it was 30 years. He's only been prime minister for 30 years, but apparently for 10 years before he became prime minister, he also had this same dream, which I regard as a delusion. But what I'm saying is, this is not an ally for India. Come on. India is a world leader. It should not be partnering with such a destabilizing country that committed a genocide, after all, just before our eyes in the last couple of years. And the same thing is true, with all respect, because I really respect India, but not the United States right now, which is also a destabilizing force. Why is India part of the Quad? The Quad. That is a U.S. alliance against China. India and China should be working out their issues bilaterally. They don't need the United States to work out their bilateral issues. So I think the BRICS got a little bit tied up in these lower level political issues. But the real stakes for the BRICS is very straightforward. The BRICS are three of the world's superpowers that are representing half the world's population that have a major opportunity and I would say responsibility to help stop globally destabilizing wars and have the stature to say to the United States, stop it. Yes, you're a superpower. So are we. We're going to live together. We're not going to wreck the world. You're not going to run the world. We're going to be responsible together.
Well, I hope that someone out there is listening, and that there is still a window open for those conversations to happen. I think for the sake of the whole world at this point, I think that would be welcome. Finally, Professor Sachs, just wanted to also touch upon another important sort of story that's unraveling here, which is America's relationship with its allies and friends in Europe. And we've seen, for example, even the UK has to an extent, pushed back and said, "We're not. This is not our war." Spain has been incredible in how their prime minister has, criticized this war and said no to the use of their bases. Now I've read today that Italy and France have said something similar, and Trump has had a meltdown again on social media just before we came on, where he's basically said that, well, he's criticized the UK and then said, you go and get your oil from the Strait of Hormuz, we won't help you, which is fantastic because thanks to him, they can't.
Exactly. The Strait of Hormuz was open before the United States started this.
But it's interesting to see the impact this is having on NATO and the US's traditional alliances in Europe, isn't it?
Yes, I think for a long time, I've been trying to explain to friends all over the world the mentality of the United States after the end of the Soviet Union was that the U.S. now dominated the world and that the U.S. believed itself to be the world's hegemon. And I, for many, many years, said this makes the U.S. a very destabilizing force. And friends would say to me, "Oh, Jeff, you're so anti-American." I said, I'm not anti-American. I think the quest for hegemony is dangerous and delusional. That doesn't make me anti-American. "Oh, the U.S. isn't as bad as you say." And I say, I know, I understand the U.S. approach. It's very tough, and don't get into this. Frankly, I don't think I was very much believed in India or elsewhere. Then came the trade wars last year. I said, believe me, you're not going to go well. You have no inside track on any of this. They again didn't believe me. Then the penalties came. I'm trying to explain the mindset in the United States, such as it is. Trump's mindset is dominance. Dominance. There are no allies. There are no friends. There are no partners. I think it's a madness, as I said at the beginning. I think it's dangerous and delusional. I think it's completely unbecoming and unnecessary for India, which I regard as a great civilization as well as a great nation, to fall into a similar situation. I think it's a shame for Europe, which after all has 450 million people, and the United States only 350 million people, to be vassals of the US, which in fact Europe became, because Europe is home to military bases of the United States all through Europe, which takes away
which are suffering because of that too.
Yes, it takes away the even freedom of imagination. That's why I'm saying in India, don't be part of the Quad, for God's sake. Make your bilateral relations with China for sure. Discuss these issues. They're important. I don't deny they're important, but they don't run through the United States of America, which has its own delusions.
well, who would have thought, Professor Sachs, that one day we would be sitting here and calling America perhaps the greatest destabilizer in the world today, which is exactly,
I would have. I would have.
Yeah,
'Cause I was saying it for years, and now people can see it, and it's time. I've been saying for 30 years in my own country, learn to play with others. You are one country among many. You are one power among many. Share the sandbox is how I put it for 30 years. And this is absolutely essential right now.
You've been absolutely bang on in your prediction. I do hope that you're wrong about this war getting worse before it gets any better. We're all crossing our fingers and hoping that there is some way out. How that will happen, we'll have to wait and see. Clearly, Trump is on the back foot, which is why he's behaving the way that he is. This war has not worked out the way that he thought.
Absolutely.
Professor Sachs, thank you very much for joining us on DeKoder today with your perspective. Thank you.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
And we'll be back again with much more on this developing story in a few days. Do join us.